The high cost of medical care seems to be a defining feature of American life. The price we pay for treatment is a big reason why spending is expected to top $5 trillion next year, and why healthcare spending continues to rise. During President Donald Trump's first term, he took on prices as a problem for markets to solve. He made prices for medical care public by law with the hope consumers would shop and competition would tame healthcare inflation. But 4 years later, the data is incomplete, sometimes inaccurate, and pretty tough to use. Today, what happened after prices became public and where Trump and Republicans might look to go as the party sweeps into power in January. From the studio at the Leonard Davis Institute at the University of Pennsylvania, I'm Dan Gorenstein. This is Tradeoffs. Tradeoffs reporter-producer Melanie Evans is here today to dive into the state of public prices in healthcare with us. Melanie, hello and welcome. This is your first story.
Dan, thank you. I am so excited to be here, and I'm thrilled that price transparency is the first subject I get to tackle at Tradeoffs.
Fantastic. So look, before we get into what Trump did, let's talk about who transparent prices were designed to help. Give people a little context.
Absolutely. The Trump administration wanted to make it easier for both employers and consumers. Employers pay most of workers' health insurance premiums. When hospitals and doctors and drug makers raise their prices, health insurance premiums usually go up. And this is relevant for consumers because, obviously, they pay premiums too. Consumers also get hit by high prices when bills fall under the deductible. Americans spent an estimated $508 billion out of their own pockets on healthcare last year. That's a lot of money.
Okay, so Trump said he wanted these two groups, employers and consumers, to be able to see prices so they could be smart shoppers. What did he do exactly?
Two things, really. The Trump administration issued regulations that said hospitals and insurance companies had to publish their prices, but in two formats. The first format is an enormous file with all of the prices, which can be downloaded off the internet. These giant price files, in theory, could be super helpful for employers as they shop for competitively priced networks of hospitals and doctors for their workers. These files are way too big for consumers like you and me, Dan. So the second format is an online tool where consumers can look up prices or estimated out-of-pocket costs.
So Trump's plan, make it easier for consumers and employers to shop. That, in turn, puts pressure on hospitals and everybody else to make their prices more competitive. And voila, you slow the growth in healthcare spending.
That was the thinking. But pulling it off has been harder than a lot of people expected. For consumers to shop around and put pressure on prices, they need complete, accurate, and comparable public prices, and that is not what we have today. Instead, it's a patchwork of incomplete, sometimes inaccurate data, which makes really serious shopping super tough. Remember, this is a list of prices for nearly all goods and services across most of healthcare. One company that tracks these public prices, Turquoise Health, told me there are as many as 1 trillion distinct prices. And get this, Dan, they're updated every month. To give you a sense of just how massive that really is, the average independent grocery store has about just 12,000 items listed.
My Lord.
I know. And look, I interviewed employers and employer groups for this story, Dan, and the data can be pretty hairy to use. I spoke with Ginger Miller. She oversees health benefits for Pennsylvania-based snack food company Utz Brands.
They've got these incredible voodoo chips, Melanie, that are amazing. I love Utz's voodoo chips.
Well, it's funny you're talking about voodoo chips because Ginger told me about one employee who was shopping for care and was quoted what's called a zombie code or a ghost code. These are basically prices for medical care that no one actually provides. Another worker had two price quotes from competing hospitals. The worker logically assumed that the cheaper price would be best.
Makes sense.
But Miller dug into it. She noticed that the cheaper price was cheaper because it was an incomplete list of all the services the employee needed. She compared that experience to ordering one of my favorite foods, apple pie. What you may get could be pie, or pie with whipped cream, or pie a la mode, and the price for each is different. What really bothers Ginger is that, in theory, the public prices should be able to help Ginger help her coworker, but the data is such a mess that she usually can't. She said, quote, "It's very disheartening that you just can't take this into your own hands and be able to make good decisions about how to take care of your health and how to spend."
Obviously, that is no way to shop, Melanie. So is this a wash? I mean, is anyone really doing meaningful shopping here?
Well, as bleak as it sounds, and it's pretty tricky, I want to give you a full picture here, Dan. There are companies out there like Turquoise that are cleaning up the data, which tells me that in the future, this data could be really meaningful. And even right now, as rough as it currently is, there are a determined few who are finding ways to use these prices. One of them is the 32BJ Health Fund. It's a union fund that provides insurance for more than 200,000 people across a bunch of employers. And the fund turned their analysts loose on this data. They realized they could do better on prices. As cumbersome and incomplete as it is, the public prices are helping 32BJ negotiate its next contract and get a better bargain.
When we come back, Melanie walks us through the potential unintended consequences of price transparency and what Republicans doubling down on their work may look like. Welcome back. Before the break, Melanie, you shared a ray of sunlight. We're seeing this shifting landscape where consumers and employers now expect more transparency. I mean, this is unprecedented. There's just a lot more now that we know about prices than we used to.
Yes. And remember, the prices are out there for everyone to see. The most revealing thing here, Dan, is that Turquoise Health, the price aggregation company I talked about just a few minutes ago, well, their primary customers are hospitals and insurers. Julie Yu is head of healthcare investing for the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz, one of Turquoise investors. And she told me, quote, "We see it as kind of like this arms race. This isn't a surprise. This could go badly for consumers. Like, hospitals could informally collude to keep prices high."
Sure. I mean, I talked about this with Margot Sanger-Katz at the New York Times. Margot reported on a study of what happened when the government in Denmark mandated prices for concrete be made public. Prices didn't go down. They went up. They went way up.
Yes, this is a solid example of how this could go sideways.
Solid, Melanie, really, when we're talking about concrete, solid.
Solid indeed. Hospitals could just tacitly agree to avoid competition. Here's another scenario. Hospitals and doctors at the low end of the market might start to demand and get higher prices. For now, there's just not a lot of public analysis that can tell us how markets are responding to public prices.
Let's take stock here for a second. We're about 4 years into what is really, candidly, a national experiment. It's been complex. It's been messy. There has been some progress, but we have yet to see some sort of market transformation.
That's about right. Let me make one other point, though. As frustrated as employers and consumer groups and researchers are, almost everyone I spoke to said price information is essential to inform decisions about how to tame healthcare prices. They also agreed public prices alone aren't enough to do the job.
All right, Melanie. I guess the question now is what's next, right? I mean, as Trump returns to the White House and Republicans take control of Congress, how does price transparency, again, right, this is one of Trump's most lasting healthcare moves, fit into Republicans' plans?
Well, based on my reporting, Some conservatives consider price transparency rules as part of an unfinished Republican agenda to remake private insurance. President Trump first introduced price transparency as one of several intertwined policies that put patients on the hook for a greater share of their health spending.
Right. I remember in his first term, the administration expanded options for people to set aside money for healthcare, for example.
Exactly. The goal here was to get healthcare to look more like other markets and, again, slow rising healthcare costs. The Trump administration also expanded options for health insurance with fewer benefits and less financial protection, but also came at a lower cost for consumers, the so-called skinny health plans. Now, the Biden administration reversed some of these Trump-era policies, but current GOP proposals would look to resurrect these ideas in some form and advance others that bring a more free market approach.
It sounds like you're telling me, Melanie, that as Republicans return to Washington, they think the insurance market has insulated consumers too much. Consumers need to face more exposure, but they need tools like bigger health savings accounts, less expensive insurance plans, these skinny plans, and real price transparency to help them navigate this greater exposure.
I think that's right, Dan. And of course, it's unclear if this approach can work. There are two real challenges, though, that I think are worth mentioning. One, research shows that when consumers have more skin in the game, they tend to cut back on care indiscriminately for unnecessary services and medical care they absolutely need to stay healthy. And two, there has been a ton of consolidation in the healthcare markets over the last few decades. As much as Republicans may want consumers to shop, there are some markets, many of them rural and red, where there's only one game in town.
Melanie Evans, thanks so much for your story.
Thank you, Dan.
I'm Dan Gorenstein. This is Tradeoffs.
Thanks for listening to Tradeoffs. If you've just discovered us, remember to subscribe to the feed so you never miss an episode. Subscribing is free and easy on whichever podcasting app you use, the NPR app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen. The Tradeoffs team is producers Ryan Levy and Melanie Evans, editor Deborah Franklin, executive director Jessica Silverman, marketing director Catherine Dougal, audience engagement lead Shannon Crane, with help from Kate Seepy and Cedric Wilson, sound designer Andrew Perella, executive editor Dan Gorenstein, and senior producer Leslie Walker. The Tradeoffs theme song was composed by Ty Sitterman, with additional music this episode from Blue Dot Sessions and Epidemic Sound. Additional thanks to G. Bai, Carl Villamoria, Brian Blaze, Michael Chernew, Sean Greminger, Cynthia Fisher, Matthew Grennan, Jason Kleinman, Cora Opsel, Caroline Pearson, Molly Smith, and Ashley Swanson. Thanks also to all our listeners who help to support our work with their financial contributions. We'd love it if you joined them at tradeoffs.org/donate. Our media partner is Side Effects Public Media, based at WFYI. Tradeoffs is supported by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Arnold Ventures, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, the Sozoze Foundation, Just Trust, West Health, the California Healthcare Foundation, the Leonard Davis Institute at the University of Pennsylvania, and the National Institute for Healthcare Management Foundation. Our supporters are not involved in any decisions about our journalism. The views expressed in this episode are those of the individuals and not those of Tradeoffs staff, advisors, or funders.